The median home price in Canada around 2003 was around $220,000. By 2022, it ballooned to $810,000, although that was only really for like a month or two. But right now, it is still ballooned to just under $700,000, meaning that home prices have still more than tripled in less than 2 decades. So think about this, to qualify for a mortgage on the average home, and keep in mind most of these homes are really apartments or townhouses, but you would need an income of about $140,000, and when you consider that the median personal income in Canada is about $43,000, and the median household income is about a little over $80,000, you would need to be roughly in the top 10% of income earners just to afford the average house in this country. Now, meanwhile, rental costs are skyrocketing as well. Rents surged nearly 8% year over year in 2024, pushing even more Canadians towards financial breaking points. It's gotten so bad, polls show that 45% of Canadians now fear they may never own a home. Welcome to the new Canadian dream, everyone. A lifetime of renting or crushing debt. You get your pick. If housing alone wasn't enough to crush Canadian wallets, inflation might be coming along too soon again. Gas prices are still relatively high. Families once comfortable in middle-class lifestyles now are struggling to just afford the basics. And here's another thing, incomes have not been keeping pace. Real after-tax income has actually been declining. In fact, in 2022, real after-tax income for the average Canadian actually went down 3.4%. After decades of gradual improvement, Canadians in 2025 actually have less buying power than they did a decade ago. And for an economy that has pretty much had steady growth since the creation of the country, that's pretty shocking. I mean, once upon a time, Canadian prosperity meant comfort and security and stability. Today, it just means juggling bills, cutting corners, and feeling poorer every single day. So Canada's economic engine is running out of fuel, and nowhere is this clearer than in productivity. In 2023, Canada's productivity actually shrank by 1.8%, the worst performance in the entire OECD. Canadian workers now produce around 30% less per hour than their American counterparts. How did this happen? Well, consider the surge in self-employment, which sounds entrepreneurial, but really it's part-time work. Roughly 13% of Canadians consider themselves self-employed. However, now most of these are not really small business owners. They are delivering Uber Eats or doing just gig work. And this has become somewhat of a forced thing, not because they dreamt of independence, but because stable jobs are disappearing in Canada. Decades ago, productivity was Canada's quiet strength. From booming tech in the 1990s to natural resources in the 2000s, productivity drove real incomes higher every single year. Now, without productivity growth, Canada's economy resembles a hamster wheel. Everyone's really working hard, but it's not really going anywhere. Now, investors have been smelling all of this economic trouble from miles away, and right now, Canada reeks of uncertainty. FDI, which is foreign direct investment, critical to job creation and economic growth, well, that's bleeding right now. By late 2023, Canada had a staggering net outflow of $811 billion, meaning that Canada had $811 billion more leave the country than come into the country. And this number might soon be hitting $1 trillion with the way things are working out. So why the exodus? Why is all this money leaving? Well, Canadian businesses and foreign investors alike complain about endless red tape, uncompetitive taxes, sluggish government approvals, and chronic infrastructure delays. Projects that could generate billions in revenue are either cancelled or moved abroad. Even Canada's beloved energy sector lost foreign investment, sending Canadian companies scurrying to invest in the US instead. Historically, Canada thrived as a magnet for foreign capital. It welcomed car companies from Japan, tech investments from Silicon Valley, and global energy giants pouring billions into Alberta's oil sands. Today, it's flipped. Canadian money flees, confidence wanes, and investment evaporates, leaving fewer jobs, lower growth, and fading hope for prosperity. Now, the next problem here is a little bit touchy, but it is immigration. Canada has historically embraced immigration, proudly calling it the nation's economic lifeblood. But in recent years, immigration policies shifted dramatically, becoming a tool for short-term fixes rather than sustainable growth. Over the last few years, Canada's population has been growing by almost 3% per year, in some cases a little bit more, depending on what metric you use. And keep in mind, because there's a declining birth rate, all of this population growth was solely from immigration. And the majority of this immigration came in the form of temporary foreign workers or international students, almost entirely from India, who were men between the ages of 20 and 40. And it was really funny at the time hearing the news, because some people called Canada, now an open borders country, accepting full-on multiculturalism, and then some were saying that there were just people taking advantage of the system, and that's why so many people were coming to Canada. However, the Prime Minister at the time, Justin Trudeau, admitted that these programs were pretty much exclusively expanded to quickly patch up labor shortages. However, there was no real labor shortage. It was just businesses refused to raise wages and didn't want to pay people more for the rising cost of living. So they lobbied the government, and the temporary foreign worker program just completely exploded. And all of a sudden, the job market just got completely insane, where some people have to send now hundreds of applications just to get one response. And then there's another dark side. Immigration-driven population growth has skyrocketed housing demand and intensified infrastructure strain. Many newcomers find themselves in survival jobs, earning less and contributing minimally to productivity gains. At the same time, businesses relying on cheap imported labor avoid improving wages and training locals, keeping Canadian wages low. And all of these temporary solutions just breed long-term problems. Canada's strategy of rapid immigration boosts GDP numbers, and that looks good for the Prime Minister, sure, but GDP per capita has barely moved or in fact decreased, meaning the average Canadian isn't actually better off. Canada risks creating a two-tiered labor market, employers addicted to cheap temporary workers, and citizens struggling with flat wages and rising costs. And again, Canada once prided itself on having a lot of global talent, especially homegrown talent. But these days, there's a disturbing trend that's also happening. Canada's own talented workers, the top end of the Canadian labor, they're just packing up and leaving. More Canadians are emigrating today than at any other time since the 1990s, when a similar brain drain, which saw doctors, engineers, and entrepreneurs flee to the United States. In fact, just in 2023, 42,000 Canadian-born citizens in Ontario left for the United States. Not even all of Canada, just Ontario. So why are so many Canadians saying goodbye to Canada? Well, the reasons aren't complicated. There's cheaper housing in the US, lower taxes, higher salaries, and greater economic freedom abroad, especially in booming US states like Florida, Texas, and Arizona, which is where most Canadians go. For example, in Canada, young software engineers earn roughly 30% less than their American counterparts, which is why nearly 2/3 of recent software engineering graduates in Canada bolt for the United States. Now, when your best doctors, entrepreneurs, engineers, and innovators consistently choose to build lives elsewhere, something has gone seriously wrong at home. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a catastrophe for future innovation, growth, and prosperity. Now, next up, we have Canada's unemployment crisis. So at first glance, Canada's unemployment rate looks acceptable. I mean, 6.6%, that is a little bit high, but it's still within a normal range for a lot of countries. But beneath the surface lies a deeper illness, stagnant wages, chronic underemployment, and frustrated workers juggling multiple gigs just to stay afloat. And also, in some of the larger cities like Toronto, unemployment is pretty much around 8.5% to 9%, and that is a very high number. Now, next up, a lot more of a topical thing is that Canada's economy relies heavily on international trade, especially with its largest partner, the United States. Roughly 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. Historically, this connection has been beneficial, but today, it leaves Canada dangerously vulnerable. Why? Because a potential US-China trade conflict could easily drag Canada down into a deep, dark depression. Canada is essentially a small boat tied to a giant American ship. When the US economy sneezes, Canada doesn't just catch a cold, we get pneumonia. America's push for domestic investment, like the Inflation Reduction Act, which encourages companies to buy American, well, that hurts Canadian manufacturers. Also, with each US tariff threat, or Buy America policy, that all forces Canadian businesses to scramble for exemptions or lose market share, threatening billions of dollars in exports and thousands of jobs. So all of this is happening at once. You have a housing crisis, essentially an unemployment crisis, an underemployment crisis, a wage crisis. There's a potential trade war with the United States and China, the two largest economies in the world. So a lot of experts paint a disturbing picture for this. The OECD has once again stated that Canada is projected to be the lowest performing advanced economy in the world over the next several decades, with real GDP per capita growth expected to crawl along at just 0.7% per year for the next 5 to 10 years. That is dead last among all developed nations. Think about that. Today's young Canadians might never significantly surpass their parents' standard of living. And this would be the first generation for that to happen in this country. With productivity lacking, investment fleeing the country, Canada risks a prolonged period of economic stagnation. I mean, Canada technically over the last 10 years has gone through a GDP per capita recession or a lost decade, depending on how you want to word it. And this all seems like doom and gloom, but there are some potential silver linings. I mean, if Canada acts decisively. Housing affordability could slightly improve if the government drastically increases housing supply. Aggressively investing in technology, its energy sector, and innovation could boost productivity growth. Shifting immigration strategies from essentially just bringing in immigration to fill all low-wage jobs in the country, to only bringing in high-skilled and highly educated workers, that would also likely boost productivity and raise wages. Canada also has the infrastructure for a lot if they want to really just take over one sector. I mean, there was once a thriving tech hub in Kitchener-Waterloo. Canada's energy sector was once the darling of the world that everyone wanted to invest in. The agricultural sector used to dominate on the global scale. I mean, there's a lot of things that could help get Canada out of this lost decade. And so there is hope. However, normally when we reach this part of the video, I would normally tell everyone to go check out my YouTube Creator Academy in the link down below, or to click on my documentaries playlist or my next video. However, for all Canadians out there, so I want you to think about this one thing that I need to get off my chest here. So Justin Trudeau stepped down and now Mark Carney is the Prime Minister of Canada. Mark Carney was the chairman of Brookfield Asset Management. Now, if you don't know what Brookfield is arguably the largest and most powerful company in this entire country. And depending on the year, they might have had the most assets under management for all of Canada. And he was the chairman of that company. Now, that company, which was arguably the most powerful in Canada, if not for sure top 10, it was leaked 7 months ago that the company was moving its headquarters to New York and diversifying out of Canada. Now, the Prime Minister says he had nothing to do with it because the official announcement happened, just a few weeks ago. But these processes take years, and he was certainly at the helm of moving his company, again, one of the largest in all of Canada, out of Canada. And the party that he is currently running is also the party that was just a few weeks ago the most unpopular party in the history of Canadian politics. And there's also the irony of a lot of Canadians are complaining about an oligarchy in the United States or from different countries abroad. Meanwhile, if you really think about it, we aren't quite sure if Mark Carney is close to being a billionaire or not, because he won't disclose his financials. However, again, being the most powerful person at the most powerful company in Canada, it makes you think that he's definitely not worth, $100,000. And seeing a lot of people swing to this party is just very strange to me. Especially because he's insinuating he's a believer in modern monetary theory as well as essentially all of the economic beliefs of the Liberal Party. He just very much believes in all of them too. Nothing's really changed. Now, again, I'm not saying to vote for the Conservatives here, but I'm saying, please, dear God, do not fall for the party that has put in policy after policy to kill the Canadian dream over the last 10 years. The NDP also deserves some responsibility for this. But I mean, hell, vote for the Greens if you want, or let's make Canada French again with Bloc Québécois. There's also the Marijuana Party or the Rhinoceros Party, which are two official parties you can actually vote for in the next Canadian election. I'm not joking. Just please be smart. Don't let the orange man down south cloud your judgment about what has happened over the last 10 years. It's the exact same party with virtually the exact same beliefs. There's just a new face at the helm and he might be a billionaire.